HPA axis, which stands for hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, HPA. And I'm just selecting one thing to talk about. There's a lot of different areas in neuroscience I can cover, but just for example, the HPA is a very complex set of direct influences between these three areas of the brain. It represents a complex interaction of direct influences and feedback interactions among these three areas. And what this HPA axis controls, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis controls, it controls reactions to stress. It regulates your digestion, your immune system, your mood, and your emotions, and even energy storage and expenditure, how much energy you need to store up and have for the future. So we'll get more into some neuroscience later on, but I wanted to just kind of touch on it a little bit here in the beginning. Now, historically, emotion and reason have been considered to be opposing forces, right? It's kind of what Spock and Kirk are all about, two kind of opposites. However, recent psychological and neuroscientific research has been revealing that emotion and cognition are closely intertwined. Neuroscience research is confirming what I've sensed for a long time, that emotion determines, it mediates, it facilitates how we perceive our world and organize our memory and make important decisions. And, you know, I often get emails or I'm asked by traders, what are the traits that make a good trader? You know, what do you see in terms of personality characteristics among good traders? And, you know, some of the research says that it's conscientiousness is one factor. Other research says that it's cognitive ability or cognitive flexibility. And of course, those things definitely play a role. In my experience as a trading psychology coach, what I've seen is that it kind of depends, first of all, when it comes to the research on personality traits, it kind of depends on what the researcher is looking for and how they set up the research in the first place. But in general, cognitive ability, especially the ability to process information, certainly does play a role in trading. But again, in my experience working with some of the best traders in the world, one of the key traits that I see with them is the ability to tolerate discomfort in order to control one's actions and behavior. So they can, you know, basically act in line with their strategy. In other words, the key trait that I see is a combination of flexibility and resilience. So how do we become more resilient and more flexible, right? What is discipline in trading? What is it really? Everyone talks about being more disciplined, but rarely do you get much more than telling you to be more disciplined. You don't usually get much in the way of instructions on how to do it. And how do you stick to your plan? I mean, how do you tolerate the inevitable discomfort and disappointments along the way? The waiting for the setup, having to take a loss, having to manage a trade that's not quite at the target. What do you do? Well, I'm going to tell you this, that promising yourself that next time I'm going to be more patient, or next time I'll get out when I should, that's what most traders are doing. They make promises to themselves, then beat themselves up when they don't make good on their promises to do better next time. You know, they often may even borrow a set of rules from another trader, something that they saw on a website, a blog somewhere, or maybe a mentor somewhere, or a friend. They take the rules, or maybe they even develop a set of rules for themselves to follow, believing that they can kind of white knuckle it through and not veer from the rules. But relying on willpower alone is not realistic. There is a huge difference between learning from one's mistakes and constantly berating oneself about the mistakes. So I'll just want to say something about willpower specifically. Willpower is not a sustainable form of discipline because willpower is actually a finite resource and is not really sustainable primarily for some biological reasons. Decision-making and willpower depends a lot on glucose levels, blood sugar. When we make more and more decisions, it burns up glucose, and low glucose levels are associated with less willpower. So I will tell you, there's a lot of research on this. There's a lot of research on willpower and the limitations of willpower. I'm not going to get into the details here because I've got a lot of other stuff I want to share with you, but I would point you in the direction of reading the research by Roy Baumeister. If you're interested in it, you can send me an email later and I'll send you the link to his work. You can also look at the Wikipedia entry on ego depletion or decision fatigue. And you'll see how willpower is not really something you want to focus on. I mean, it's something you want to develop, but it's not the end-all be-all for discipline. There are other ways to develop discipline, which I'll talk about today. The use of positive thinking is also an attractive way of thinking about discipline, or to help us get through the trading difficulties that we're facing. And positive thinking does have a place, no doubt. Positive thinking in terms of having a positive vision for your future is important. But in and of itself, a positive vision of your future can be easily overwhelmed when you experience a trade tick by tick in the present moment, where each tick in your favor brings a sense of hope or relief, and then each tick against you feels like a personal attack. Trying to rely on positive self-talk is not going to be enough to get most traders through this pressure of the tick-by-tick experience of a trade. And the proof is that most traders still make the same mistakes even when they're using positive self-talk. And this kind of reminds me of a trader named Bob, who is someone who's can probably relate to Bob. I'm sure a lot of people can. Bob puts a lot of hours into his trading in more ways than one. He studies the charts. He's got spreadsheets and intermarket correlations and spreadsheets of his own trading stats. He's pretty much glued to the screen during the entire market day. He's very busy. And Bob's a hard worker. Working hard is second nature to him. He's worked really hard to get into the right college. He earned a degree in engineering, graduated near the top of his class at a prestigious university. He was really lucky when he entered the workforce because at the time the economy was rolling along and recruiters were seeking people just like Bob. And the freedom to be his own boss is what brought him into trading, becoming the master of his own destiny. But with all his hard work, Bob is still about a break-even in terms of his P&L. What Bob doesn't realize is that the skills that made him a good engineer are not the same skills that will make him a good trader. Yeah, there's a certain amount of study involved in trading, no doubt, but in the final analysis for a trader, it's about how you respond to discomfort, not how much you study the charts, and not how many spreadsheets you have. Now, Bob, like a lot of traders, did well on a simulator, but with cash, he just succumbs to the anxiety of interacting with a market that's in constant motion, that will always show some noise and ambiguity. Now, as an engineer, this is a hard, ambiguity is a hard thing. Bob realizes that, that his background as an engineer might be an issue. His hesitation to enter when he sees the signal and the ability to hold a winning trade, really is what is preventing him from succeeding. Like a lot of perfectionists, Bob is getting in his own way. And like many perfectionists, interacting with something as messy as the market brings up a lot of anxiety. But instead of dealing with the issue, Bob's going to spend a lot more time searching for the answer in the charts and in the spreadsheets. Deep down, Bob knows the solution to his problem is within him, not in the charts. But by analyzing the external data, that's like everything outside of him, it keeps Bob busy. And that kind of helps to bind the anxiety to a degree. That's what many perfectionists do. Perfectionists like to stay busy. Now, getting Bob in touch with the underlying roots to his need for perfection is what Bob needs to do. And stay tuned, maybe for a future webinar, and we'll see what happens to Bob. All right, so the area of the unconscious, the subconscious influences on our trading. I could easily do an entire webinar or a series of webinars just on this one topic alone, but I've got a lot of good stuff and some practical tips I want to share with you later in the webinar, so I'm going to keep this brief. I'm not going to address unconscious issues when it comes to things like beliefs that were developed in childhood and things like that, although those are very important. I'm not going to get into that in this webinar. In fact, I'm just going to talk about some other aspects of unconscious influence. And the first one I'll talk about is priming. Okay? And priming is an example of the power of our subconscious around how we see things and how we decide. Priming happens all the time. Here's how it can work in trading. In fact, this is some empirical research, actual research that was conducted I can share with you. So what they did is they took a group of professional traders, professionals, not amateurs, and they showed the effects of priming on risk-taking very clearly. They took this group of professional traders and they primed them by having them all read an article. Actually, they had half of them read an article about a person visiting a casino, and in that article, in that story, the person began to trade very aggressively, very heavily. And then they had the other half of the group read an article about somebody visiting a casino who just kind of wanders through the casino and doesn't stop and gamble at all, just kind of walks through and no gambling whatsoever. Then they put both groups, after reading those two different stories, very graphic stories, they put both groups on a simulator. Well, the group that read the more aggressive story about the aggressive gambling started taking much more risk on the simulator as in their trading. And the group that had just read about somebody walking through a casino but not gambling, they put on much less risk. As a matter of fact, they also replicated the research, and they had the same people exposed to both stories to make sure there were no differences between traders. And they found that the same traders would be affected by the priming as well. So it's very interesting research. Here's another example of priming. Another example of the unconscious at work. This one is called framing. This is one that probably people are familiar with if you've read about behavioral economics. Pretty well known and pretty well researched. It comes from prospect theory, also known as loss aversion theory. So if you were to give a group of people $100, if I gave everybody here listening to me $100, and then I asked you to choose between A, where you keep $40 for sure, or B, where you lose $40 for sure, I can tell you there's about 65% of you, approximately 2/3 of you, will choose A. But the funny thing is, A and B are identical. You should really see kind of a split, 50-50 between A and B, because they're identical. So why is it that more people will select A? And the reason is because A is worded in terms of gains, whereas B is worded in terms of losses, even though the net effect is the same. This is a well-known phenomenon known as loss aversion, where most people do whatever they can to avoid even the perception of loss, even the perception of loss. Now, an interesting side note here is that marketing and advertising people understand how to capitalize on the natural human inclination of loss aversion. If something is on sale at a store, for instance, that store is going to sell much more products if they tell their customers how much more they're going to save, not how much less they're going to spend. So another way that the unconscious works is that we don't see the market as it is. We see it as we are. I'm going to say that again. It's very important. We don't see the market as it is. We see it as we are. If you give 10 people the same chart, you're going to get 10 different interpretations. And the reason is that our beliefs, our expectations, and our emotions all come together and act as a filter on our perception of everything, including the market. And that filter projects a structure onto the market that forms the basis for our entry and exit decisions. It is basically human nature to see things through our own personal filter. And later in this webinar, I'm going to talk more about this filter and how to work with it to maximize your performance. But for now, I want to tell you about the fact that it's not simply that past experiences, both in trading and experiences that have nothing to do with trading, determine how we view and approach the present based upon beliefs we've created. Instead, our present beliefs are governed by past experiences that are linked to unconscious emotional memories. Unconscious emotional memories. Emotion is a main ingredient in developing beliefs, and then re-experiencing of the same or similar emotion is what helps keep the belief in place. So one very important aspect of changing self-limiting beliefs is to first understand how and why you developed the belief in the first place, and to look at how the belief continues to be supported through the re-experiencing of emotions tied to the original conflict. Now, when you do this type of self-analysis, do this type of work, it means you have to understand that what you are feeling and why you are feeling it is very important, understanding the context of your feelings. I'll talk more about this in a future slide in this webinar, but it's an important concept to convey. Now, I like to often put this in a tweet. I remind this to my clients all the time. My clients know this. It's not enough to know what causes the market to move. It's equally important to know what causes you to move. As a matter of fact, I think it actually may be more important to know what causes you to move. In trading, we have to make split-second decisions during what I call a hot state, right? When we're under stress, perhaps right after a loss or even after a win, or when we're feeling anxious. Now, listening to me right now in this webinar, chances are you're probably not trading. Or when you're reading a book about trading psychology, you know, you're relatively calm and you're probably agreeing with what the book says or with what I'm saying. But when you start trading again, whether it's tomorrow or later today or whenever it is, when you start trading again, you will no longer be in the state that you're in right now as you listen to me. Okay? Will you be able to do the things that I'm talking about when you're in a hot state as opposed to a relatively cool, calm, and collected state right now? Now, in the market, price generally follows the path of least resistance, which we see as price going up and down in search of more buyers and more sellers. You know, and if you're a student of auction market theory or market profile, then you know what I mean. In many ways, the human mind tends to follow the path of least resistance as well. We, as humans, what happens is we seek out comfort and we try to avoid pain or discomfort. It's that path of least resistance. So what I'm saying is that while price follows the path of least resistance, the path that we must follow as a trader may involve pushing ourselves beyond our comfort level. Price may take that path of least resistance, but as a trader, you're going to have to take possibly the path of most resistance. But it's okay. I'm going to show you how you can do it. A common pattern for a trader in a drawdown or maybe red for the day or week is to either gun it or, you know, eat like a bird, take small profits and poop like an elephant, you know, with large losses. They take the path of least resistance. They either take those tiny profits because they're afraid to lose a small unrealized profit, you know, or they hold that loser too long and add to it that smoking hopium trade. And then they end up with a very large loss, not to mention the loss of opportunity while they were sitting with that loser. So these are just a few examples of how raw, unacknowledged, and unexpressed emotion can easily result in an impulsive behavior such as an impulse trade. Psychologists like myself, we like to sometimes refer to it as acting out. Instead of tolerating the feeling of loss or missing out or tolerating the anxiety, instead the trader acts out the feeling. And later on in this webinar, I'm going to outline a very specific technique that's going to help you to decrease the odds that you act out your feelings. And I just want to share a short story about a trader who is struggling with this, named Malcolm. Is a trader that many of you can probably relate to. He's what I refer to as a give-back trader. Very common problem in trading. Like a lot of traders, Malcolm, not every morning, but very often he'll start out pretty well, pretty decent in the morning. But by the end of the day or by midday, he's given back a lot of his profits. And sometimes he's even in the red at that point. And you know, sometimes he recognizes the problem as, you know, I made some money and that felt so good. I want to keep going and make some more very soon. So then he starts taking trades that are less than optimal. Other times it's just simply the idea of just one more trade and I can get over that kind of certain P&L goal or certain number that he's kind of locked onto in his mind. But often what happens in reality is that this last trade or this extra trade ends up costing him dearly, and he becomes so frustrated after it that he continues to trade even after that, often with a combination of impulsive trades and trades where he gets out too early, kind of oscillating back and forth. And he finds himself in a pretty deep hole by the end of the day. Super common, very, very, very common pattern I just described. So speaking of patterns, one of the things is to know about yourself is that humans are natural pattern seekers. The brain is a natural pattern seeker. And one of the reasons why is because, you know, the reason why we survived the hunter-gatherer phase of human history hundreds of thousands of years ago. Back then, we had predators that were bigger, faster, stronger than humans. The only reason why humans really survived was because we could adapt to our situation. We can adapt to the environment very quickly, recognize patterns that suggest patterns that suggest threat or opportunity in our environment. So our ancestors who were good at recognizing patterns of threat or opportunity survived, and they passed on their genes. So therefore, we're all pretty good natural pattern seekers. But there's a problem in trading. The ability to recognize a pattern is not enough. It's an important step. It's a crucial step, but it's not enough on its own for a trader to succeed. The ability to act in your best interest when you see a pattern is what determines your success as a trader. And the ability to recognize your own patterns is a really big part of this. So most traders are focusing on what I call the external data. Okay, they're focusing on patterns in the information outside of themselves. They're looking at the market, the news, the charts, things like that. But in the heat of the moment, when we are under pressure, or when the external data becomes ambiguous, what happens is the brain still needs data to help it decide what to do. And what happens is that the internal data influences our perception and our judgment and how we interact with the external data. So understanding and recognizing key patterns in the internal data is a critical part of improving how you respond to risk, opportunity, and uncertainty. So on this slide, I have a few examples of the internal data. And this is not a complete list. And it's not only is it potentially a very large list, but there's a lot of interaction, complex interaction within the internal data in terms of the mind-body connections and things like that. But I'll just highlight a few. One of them to pay attention to is sleep. Okay, sleep is a very large factor in your trading. There's been empirical research done with at least 4 different groups that I'm aware of: professional traders, professional poker players, commercial airline pilots, and surgeons. With all 4 groups, under conditions of sleep deprivation, they become more risk tolerant, and they often are willing to seek out more risk than they normally would. So that's really key. In fact, I've seen other research that says that if you get less than 5 hours of sleep, you're working drunk. So I think we can apply that to trading. Less than 5 hours of sleep, you're trading drunk. Now, glucose, another physiological factor. Like I mentioned earlier, glucose is a big variable in our degree of willpower. And something to remember is that although the brain only accounts for 2% of total body weight, our brain utilizes approximate transmitters, comes in the form of amino acids. So if you don't have a good diet, you're kind of putting yourself at a cognitive disadvantage. So diet has a big part of it as well. HRV, which stands for heart rate variability. I use a lot of biofeedback in my own trading, and I do it with some of my one-on-one coaching clients, where basically the idea is you learn to manage your heart rate variability, which in some ways can be a proxy for your emotional state, and it's can have a very big impact on your trading. Like I said, there's a lot of complex interaction within the internal data, which I'm not going to get into. Testosterone and cortisol and the ratios between the two, and so many other things. But the main idea, and I'll get into this later towards the end, I'm going to give you guys some practical tips, is what I want you to realize at this point, your take-home, your takeaway from this, is you have to manage your physical energy, manage the physical body. Trading is not just mental. It's critical to manage the physical aspect as well. Now, also as part of this internal data is I have emotions listed here. Our feelings about our P&L, our feelings about our social status, and not only that, which I don't have on the slide, is the fact that emotions are often unconscious. As I mentioned earlier, the way those self-limiting beliefs that we have that don't go away, the reason why they're still there is because they're supported by unconscious emotion. We start to experience feelings without even realizing what the feeling is. And then we let it go, and we let it occur. And it just takes on a life of its own, and it supports the belief. And that's what happens. So working with emotions is critical, and I'm going to talk more about it here in a little bit. I will say this though before I talk about it, one of the most common areas that's often talked about in trading psychology is emotion, right? That word is used a lot. And I hope by now that you can see that the idea that emotions must be eliminated is not really realistic. In fact, emotion should be seen as a source of information. That's really what one of the primary purposes of emotion is, to give us information about our environment and how we are interacting with our environment. So let me talk a little bit about emotions and some neuroscience research. There's an important quote that I have here up on the screen. I'm going to read it out loud. This was a quote from Jennifer Lerner, who is a social psychologist at Harvard. She does a lot of research with traders, a lot of behavioral economics, a lot of behavioral finance research. And she tells us that the empirical literature suggests that emotions influence numerous cognitive processes: selective attention, evaluative judgments, perceptions of risk, and estimates of value and causality. Her empirical research is actually showing this. This is not just her opinion, but research in the lab is showing this. And I can tell you that in our everyday environment, and especially when trading, we are confronted with a large amount of incoming information. And as the capacity of our brain is limited, we cannot process all that information. We have to select a subset to prioritize its processing at the cost of other information. So the competition for neural processing resources and preferential access, basically, to conscious awareness is organized by a dedicated attention system. And emotion is very much a part of this attention system. In other words, the way the brain is wired means that emotions are elicited as an individual continuously evaluates objects, events, and situations with respect to their relevance to the individual needs, goals, and values. In fact, the recent neuroscience, the research is really proving that the old idea of successful decision-making that depends on the rational frontal lobes of the prefrontal cortex to control our urges arising from that more primitive part of the brain, the limbic system, that's not really very accurate. That's old thinking. You'll probably still hear people till this day talk about that, but that's kind of old thinking. It's not accurate. I've always sensed this, but what the researchers are now discovering and providing empirical evidence of is that effective decision-making is not possible without the motivation and meaning provided by emotional input. So let me just share with you a little bit about some of this neuroscience research and how this all came to be. I'm going to try and do it briefly and without getting too detailed, so don't bore you. I'm just going to hit the highlights here. But Antonio Damasio is one of the leading brain scientists in the world today. And besides being a brain scientist, he's also a neurologist who also sees patients as well, patients who have brain damage. And one of his patients, Elliot, was this very successful businessman who underwent neurosurgery for a tumor in which the orbital frontal cortex, which is a structure that connects the prefrontal cortex, the frontal lobe area, with the emotional areas of the brain, that orbital frontal cortex structure was damaged. And a damaged or severed orbital frontal cortex, basically what that means is now the connection between the frontal lobes and the emotional areas of the brain has been severed. That connection has been cut off. And as a result, Elliot became a real-life Mr. Spock. He was basically devoid of any emotion. But surprisingly, instead of this making him perfectly rational, he became paralyzed by every decision in life. So the point of that research is that we actually need emotion to make decisions. The fact that we require emotional input means that we're not the cold, rational agents like Spock, that traditional economics, says that we should be. There's no way we can ever become that. We're not Vulcans. Now, researchers like Damasio and Jennifer Lerner from Harvard, who I talked about on the previous slide, and other researchers as well, there's a whole group of them now, they're providing some really fascinating empirical neuroscientific evidence about all this. And I'll tell you that prior to this neuroscientific evidence in the last 3, 4, 5 years, researchers like Daniel Kahneman, he's very famous for his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, he demonstrated years ago, that showed up in his book just a few years ago, but he did the research many years ago, demonstrated the negative emotional impact of losses is twice as intense as the positive effect of gains. And this type of intense emotional reaction affects our decision-making in fairly predictable ways, such as taking on more risk by holding or adding to a loser in an attempt to avoid the intense feeling of a losing trade. All right, as I promised earlier, I want to spend some time giving you guys a specific technique you can use to manage your emotions. And I just want to begin by saying, like I mentioned earlier in this webinar, that right now, chances are, while you're listening to me, you're not trading and you're in a relatively calm state. And you're probably agreeing with a lot of what I've already said. But I bet most of you, come tomorrow morning, will be back to your old tricks. And so I'm going to give you a technique that will possibly help you to not fall back into those old patterns. So think of emotion like water, okay? Water will always find an outlet, so we have to provide an outlet for the water. If you don't, it finds its own outlet. And emotions will find outlets in the form of a behavior, or sometimes they somaticize into the body, right? You have a gastrointestinal issue, become a headache, muscle tension, a disease process of some sort. So take the word motion, M-O-T-I-O-N, add an E to the beginning, and what do you get? This is why you need a strategy to manage emotions, okay? Emotion is motion plus energy. So here's what you want to do. It's going to be helpful in your trading. Think of two types of, or categories of emotion, two types of emotion. There's one we can call present state emotion, or your current emotion, or what you're feeling right now. And then there's anticipated emotion, what you anticipate you might feel like in the future. Now, although current emotion needs to be addressed, I want you to know that anticipatory emotion are also extremely powerful motivators, just as powerful as current emotion and sometimes more powerful. For example, the anticipatory emotion of potential future regret. You know, oh, if this trade comes back after I get out, I'll feel horrible. I'll feel like an idiot. Fall for the banana in the tailpipe trick again. So that potential future regret is often what keeps people holding on to losers, right? That's a great example of it. Another example is when you are in a winning trade, but it's not yet at the target, and you're feeling nervous about it. And as you start to get more anxious, and you start seeing your unrealized gains beginning to evaporate in front of you, you start to anticipate the regret of not taking a profit, and you end up getting out too early. And that momentary gratification of taking the small profit gives you some temporary relief and makes you feel better at the moment. You know, there's that old saying that no one ever went broke taking a profit. But yet, this early exit also helps you to avoid the powerful feeling of future regret, right? But the irony is that chances are you're going to feel regret, and anyways, massive regret, when you see that the trade goes on to your target after you take your small profit. So here's a simple but very effective model of managing emotion, especially current emotion, but it even works for future anticipatory emotions. Always think of taking 3 A's before you take action, okay? The first A is anticipate emotion. Like I mentioned, emotion is inevitable. It's how we're wired. You need to expect it. You need to understand what types of emotions are going to happen for you based upon who you are. You need to be looking for them, anticipate them, okay? And then once you start to recognize that an emotion is present, you need to acknowledge it. You need to put it into words. You need to be as graphic and vivid as possible and descriptive. Acknowledge it, express it, put that feeling into words as much as possible. And then you want to analyze the emotion. When have you had this emotion before? What has it led you to before in terms of behavior? What might this emotion be connected to? Why are you having this emotion? By doing this process, anticipating, acknowledging, and analyzing the emotion, you're basically managing your emotion. That's what this is one model. There's many different models. This is one model of managing emotion. It's a very simple model, but it's very, very effective. But the model is only as effective as you are in actually doing each of the 3 steps. And I will tell you that it does require ability to identify emotion. A lot of people have trouble identifying emotion. You have to be able to identify what you're feeling. Often a physical sensation can be a good place to start. It doesn't have to necessarily be an emotional, a mental version of an emotion. It can also be a physical sensation. But it does take practice to identify, anticipate emotion. A lot of people have trouble with that. Now, one way to manage the intensity of anticipatory emotion, like this is the one where you're watching the market and you are having a hard time sitting on your hands. You want to jump in, but you know you had issues with impulse trades, and you really want to control yourself today. You don't want to jump in that market. What I'm going to suggest you can do for yourself is you need to project yourself into the future emotional state by asking yourself, how will I feel later if I jump in the market right now? How will I feel later? How will I feel at the end of the night? How will I feel tomorrow if I take this impulse trade now? And this technique of asking yourself about the future feeling, it's a very common technique that psychologists use. I didn't create it myself. It's a technique that I borrowed from others. It's a technique that is often used with people who are trying to diet, actually, and fight the urge to eat a second helping or go for that piece of chocolate cake. Now, I want to get more practical here with everybody. One of the problems that we run into trading is that we experience that trade tick by tick, or each tick in our favor brings that sense of hope or relief, and each tick against us really kind of brings us to that place of fear again. It feels like an assault against us, an attack against us. So one of the ways we can deal with that is by focusing on process goals, okay? Process goals versus outcome goals. Process goals are things that you have control over, but it takes practice, and there's different types of process goals. Outcome goals, that's the outcome of your trade. That's determined by the market primarily. That's your P&L. Now, we can control our actions, but whether the trade works or not is outside of our control. So an example of a process goal would be, there's a lot of different types. There's advanced, there's basic, there's simple. There's a lot of different types of process goals. So here's a few different examples. One type of process goal would be to develop a pre-market routine for yourself in the morning before the market opens. And that could include sub-goals, sub-process goals like meditation or exercise or engaging in some type of pre-market routine that helps you to focus and be mentally prepared. Another type of process goal would be to do real-time journaling that includes your emotions and thoughts while you're trading, and then rereading those journal entries the next day before you start trading, making that a goal every day. And another type of process goal would be, this is maybe a homework assignment for everyone, you can all do this on your own, is to categorize all your trades into one of 4 types of trades. Type 1, which is where you follow your plan and you make money. That's a good kind of trade. We all like those. Type 2, where you follow your plan, but the trade is a loss. It's the cost of business trade, right? And we don't like those, but they happen. Type 3 is where we veer from our plan and we lose money, okay? And then type 4 trades are where we veer from our plan, but we actually make money. Those are the worst kinds of trades. Those are the most dangerous. I would suggest that you categorize your trades. You should see most of them hopefully in the type 1 and type 2. If you see even just 1 or 2 trades in that type 4 category, look out, because it's really hard. Once you've had 1 or 2 impulse trades that you get paid for, it's more difficult to kind of break that behavior. But you need to understand how strong that connection is. You should look at how many type 4 trades have you actually had. How many do you have ongoing? Because if you have a lot, you've got a harder road ahead of you in terms of your trading psychology, to be honest. And another example of a process goal would be to use what I like to do a lot in my trading, and I do it with my coaching clients, is using self-directed questions, where you make it a goal to continually ask yourself certain questions while trading. Market profile has the questions of, like, what has the market done recently? What is it doing now? How good of a job is it doing? So there's market-directed questions. Well, I think we should also be using self-directed questions. And some examples of self-directed questions would include what I call kind of the grandfather, the granddaddy of all self-directed questions is, am I acting in my own best interest right now? Am I acting in my own best interest right now? That's a great question to be asking yourself throughout the day. Another question you can ask would be, on a scale of 1 to 100, how much pressure am I feeling right now? What are my options? How can I respond to this pressure? Now, when you ask these questions, I'm going to suggest that you do them out loud, where you hear yourself. You can do this if you're not on a trading desk. If you trade on your own at home, it's easy to do it out loud, or you can write it out on paper. I would suggest that you do that, but not do it in your head. If you simply go through this exercise in your head, it will not have the impact that you want it to have. It's highly likely, I should say, it won't have the impact. Much more likely that it will be powerful if you can hear your own voice or actually use your hand to write it out. Now, I'm also going to say that finding the right process goals is very helpful in breaking bad habits and developing new, better habits. Finding the right process goals can be a little bit different for each trader. That's one of the things that I do in my coaching is develop kind of meaningful process goals that reflects the unique situation of the trader. I want to share a little bit of information with you guys about developing the right type of confidence, because confidence is one of the precursors, it's one of the foundations to discipline, okay? So in addition to having a plan that reflects who you are, having rules that reflect who you are, not just rules that you borrow from someone else, and in addition to having an edge that you understand and articulate, that you can articulate what your edge is, because those are definitely prerequisites to successful trading. Besides those two things, you also have to have the right type of confidence to be able to stick to your plan. And I define confidence a little differently than most people do. I define confidence as resilience in the face of disappointment, okay? This is the type of confidence that you need to develop in order to tolerate the discomfort of waiting, of losing, of missing out, all the things that we have to face in trading. And like I said, it differs from the usual form of confidence that tends to be associated with just recent results or recent outcomes. So here are 4 concepts or tips to point you in the right direction to develop this right type of confidence. First one is self-understanding, okay? Using emotion analytics to help you become aware of the underlying subconscious motivations driving your behavior. Self-acceptance, that's basically, the idea behind that is without acceptance, it's more likely that we will act out the emotion. If you ignore the emotion, it is much more likely that you're going to succumb to it. The power of acceptance also has a very unique way of freeing us up to focus on the here and now, to be in that present moment and act accordingly. Accepting what is will keep you in the present moment. And finally, focusing on process, not outcomes, okay? That's keeping your eye on the ball, the process. Athletes don't stare at the scoreboard, the outcome. They keep their eye on the ball. And developing the right process goals for you as a trader is key, like I mentioned earlier. And by shifting your focus to the process and not so much on the outcomes, what you're doing is you're taking a lot of pressure off yourself, and you're giving yourself a chance to do something right, something that is within your control, following good process. And when you repeatedly do the right thing and experience satisfaction, regardless of whether it produced a win or a loss in your trading, if you're working within your defined parameters and you do this over and over, you're going to build a lot of self-trust and a lot of psychological capital, right? That's the true self-confidence I'm referring to. And finally, I'll just say briefly about leveraging your strengths is really important. And generally, you're going to get a much bigger bang for your buck if you leverage your strengths versus trying to build up your weaknesses. I'm not suggesting to ignore your weaknesses, but most people don't realize how powerful it is to maximize the strengths they already have. Leveraging a strength is, to its maximum, can really make up for weaknesses in other areas. So before I finish up, I want to give you guys 10 specific suggestions to consider. First one is to articulate your edge, okay? you confident in your edge? Related to this is whether your edge and your plan is a good fit for you. Are you trading someone else's set of rules? So you're going to do much better if your plan reflects who you are, not something you grabbed off the shelf. Second one is mental and physical energy are connected. Okay, you got to manage one and you will impact the other. This is that mind-body connection. Okay, managing your physical energy is going to help you mentally. A few specific tips for you. Okay, one, getting the right amount of sleep, quality sleep that I talked about earlier. Right, you're trading drunk if you're getting less than 5 hours of sleep. Stay hydrated. Drink water. Our brain uses lots of water. Our brain is mostly fat and water, basically. And many people do things that are hydroscopic, that take water away, like drinking caffeine or alcohol. So basically you have to drink about 2 cups of water for each cup of coffee to make up for it. 3, to keep your glucose levels balanced, to help that willpower. It's going to be better to probably graze instead of gorge on food, as well as having balanced meals. And I'm going to say that good nutrition is also key to provide the nutrients that form the basis of many neurotransmitters. You want to avoid, if possible, processed foods, fried foods, excessive sugar, and high glycemic foods when possible. The brain may be only 2% of the body, but it takes up 25% of the available glucose and other nutrients. So another example of why this is important is that cortisol, often referred to as the stress hormone, cortisol is it operates in response to serotonin levels often, and you can impact serotonin levels by your diet, actually. Omega-3 fatty acids, which you get in fish, will actually increase serotonin levels. Believe it or not, there's more serotonin in your gut than there is in your brain. So moving on, let me sort of speed up here. Again, water is really key. Do not trade dehydrated. Drink lots of water, because dehydration results in shrinkage of brain tissue, okay? And when you're dehydrated for long periods of time, for prolonged periods of time, there's a pretty significant adverse effect on your cognitive functioning. So I have a lot of other things here. Cover your P&L while trading. Trade the market, not your P&L. Here's a little assignment for you for the next 24 hours. Jot down every time you think about money or something connected to money. And actually, I think what's going to happen is you probably won't even be able to get through an hour before you'll get tired of the assignment, because you'll realize that you're constantly thinking about money. It's really hard not to. Awareness of personal context. What am I feeling? Why am I feeling it? As well as other aspects of the context, which I don't have time to get into today. Seeing emotion as information. Using self-directed questions, which I went over. Mental rehearsal. Okay, visualization is a key that a lot of athletes use. Doing it once a day is very helpful, but I will tell you, many traders do it, and it's not enough. Very often you have to do other things besides mental rehearsal. Identify and leverage those strengths you have. Focus on your process goals, and even consider rewarding the attainment of process goals, okay? Whether or not you did the right thing today, regardless of how much money you made or didn't make, is really important to recognize for yourself. And I'm just going to say that listening to me right now, you're probably not trading, and again, you're probably in a relatively calm state, and you're probably agreeing with a lot of what I've been telling you in this webinar. But I bet a lot of you, will be back to your old tricks again when you start trading tomorrow or whenever that is. If you're serious about doing something about it, I do offer a self-paced course that is about 8 hours of video and 2 workbooks that contain a lot of actionable, practical exercises. I shared with you a couple of them today, but there's about 40 or 50 in the course. A lot of the same concepts and actionable techniques that I use with my one-on-one coaching clients. So I'm going to offer a 10% discount. It's just time limited. It's going to be good for about a week till the 20th of May. And for the first 10 folks that go for it, I'm going to offer a 30-minute one-on-one phone or Skype consultation. So with that, if there's time for Q&A, I'm happy to stick around for that, Trevor.
Yeah, if you guys have any questions, go ahead and type them in now. I know everybody was very engaged, it seemed like, taking it in. But so if you have questions, go ahead and type them in. I'll go ahead and read them back. And we'll go from there here for the next 10 minutes or so. So let's just take a minute while you guys type in any questions. Harry's asking, do you still use the M-Wave device while you trade? I don't know what that is, but...
Yeah, I think I know who Harry is. That's a biofeedback device that measures heart rate variability. And yes, I do use it in my trading, and I use it with some of my coaching clients. There are periods of time where I don't use it, but I tend to come back to it periodically. It's very helpful. I use it not only in my trading, but even outside of trading if I'm kind of keyed up um, and I want to relax. It's a nice little tool.
Okay, there's a lot of people just asking if this has been recorded. It has been recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel as well as emailed to later this week. So I also posted a link to the course book that he just had mentioned. The link is right in the chat box. So if you guys make sure you click that before you leave so you have that open. Okay, here's a question that revolves around just diet and things like that. What are some good foods to graze on during the day while trading?
Great question. Nuts and berries. Think about eating like a gorilla, basically. Nuts for protein, berries contain a lot of nutrients. So I kind of like, personally, what I do is I have a combination of walnuts, almonds, and dried cranberries, and then I kind of have it in a cup, in a bowl on my desk. I kind of snack on that throughout the day. I have lots of water. In the morning, I eat a lot of protein. I like to have a lot of blueberries in the morning. I like to drink green tea. Green tea has an ingredient called L-theanine, which has also been isolated. You can buy it as a separate supplement. It has an effect of being kind of relaxing, but also makes you alert. So wild salmon, non-processed foods, staying away from sugar whenever possible. Although we need sugar, you can't avoid sugar altogether. But the idea is the processed foods, very, very unhealthy. And the idea that our body represents a big part of who we are. It's not just the mind that we have to take care of. It's the body, and there's a huge interaction between the two. And as I mentioned earlier, you can actually change the levels of some of the neurotransmitters, especially serotonin, by your diet. You don't have to take necessarily things that are going to work on the neurotransmitters directly. You can actually work on your diet and change the level of some neurotransmitters.
Okay. Mark's asking, how important are one's expectations about the level of trading results he or she can get? So expectations.
Expectations, yeah. Well, it's a good question. I think I'm going to assume that the person asking this question is probably an independent, self-directed trader, and there's a lot of promises that are made out there in the world of trading education. People often promise that we'll teach you how to make X amount of dollars per day or X amount of points, pips, or ticks per day or per week. And so people have these ideas in mind that they should be able to, or they can, or that it's possible to make a certain amount of money every day. And what I'm going to tell you is that I think those are actually very dangerous assumptions because the market is different. The market is an opportunity generating machine, I like to say, but you don't know about the size of the opportunities that it's generating. Some days are going to be bigger opportunities than other days. And so I think expectations need to be as flexible as possible. And I will say the one thing that should be rigid is your risk management. Risk management should be rigid, but your expectations around what's possible in terms of the upside, you need to be very flexible. There will be some days you make very little money or you end down, and other days you could do very well. But this idea that I'm going to make X amount of dollars every day is generally pretty unrealistic. There are traders, I know part of where that idea comes from, and I've worked with a lot of, and I know Trevor probably knows some of these folks too. I've worked with a lot of former floor traders, and oftentimes floor traders, they would often, they're scalping order flow, and they can get into that mindset of making a certain amount of money approximately per day, or they have these runs where they make some amount of money per day or close to it. And I think somehow that idea is kind of filtered out among other traders, or filtered into other traders, or I should say conveyed to other traders. And there's this idea that we can all make a certain amount of money every day, and I have not seen it work that way. So I just think I will say that expectations need to be as flexible as possible. And you also need to understand, where do your expectations come from? Chances are, I don't know if you're someone who was successful in a previous endeavor prior to trading. what your experience has been like with success or not, but that's also going to determine a lot about your expectations.
How many breaks throughout a normal trading day, say from bell to bell, do you recommend?
Well, breaks are good, and if you're trading bell to bell, I think you need to take pretty frequent breaks. I haven't seen any specific research that correlates the number of breaks with performance, but I will tell you this, I've seen other research that looks at like students studying, and they know that if you were to take a break at about every 50 minutes to every hour, thereabouts, for 5 or 10 minutes, it tends to, your cognitive abilities stay much sharper. Memory and attention stays sharper. So if you're doing a lot of trades, a lot of heavy trading, a lot of aggressive trading, I'm going to say at least two or three breaks a day, maybe more. I've had one client in the past who, what he does is he'll break up his day into 2 days. He'll trade 2 shifts. He'll trade heavily for a few hours, and he takes a break, works out, does his exercise routine, takes a shower, and then comes back for the second half of the day. That can work too.
Yeah, I remember hearing, I don't know if I read it or heard it somewhere, where we're so fixated on screens and stuff that it's good to step away and just look out at like nature, a tree or the sky or a river, something to just kind of give our eyes a rest from all the screen activity as well.
Exactly. And one thing that I was disturbed about when I heard about this was that because I exercise regularly myself, I'm in pretty good shape, but because I sit most of the day, even though I exercise for 45 minutes a day, when you sit for long periods of time, regardless of whether you exercise or not, that extended sedentary time that we spend, there's a lot of fat buildup, and a lot of the fine muscle movement is not going to be enough to kind of burn off calories. So what happens is, even if you exercise, sitting still all day is not good. So the moral of that, and I'm getting one of these for myself, is getting a large exercise ball to sit on, or maybe even a standing desk. So you're always in motion a little bit, and not just spending hours and hours and hours sitting.
Yeah, we've used the standing desks here at Market Delta for, I don't know, since six or 7 years, and I know everybody that sees them loves them because, I mean, it's so nice just to be able to stand and either trade or work or whatever. So I do recommend that as well.
Yeah, my wife has one. She loves it.
Yeah. Okay, so last question here. Let's see, there's a couple to choose from. Let me just check here. Well, here's a question from Mark. Is there a way to make trading more fun so that you naturally want to do it? I'll let you end with that.
Wow, gosh. Well, I'm sure there are ways you can turn it into some kind of a game with yourself, but then the danger with that is that, believe it or not, fear does have a place. And, if everything is fun and you don't really care, then the danger is that you could find yourself in a big bad loss and not treat it seriously because it's just a fun game. So I'm kind of hearing embedded in Mark's question, another side issue, which is maybe the passion for trading is not there, or maybe the anxiety around trading is so strong that he's having trouble finding the motivation to trade. So I think the issue is actually something else, not so much about how to make trading fun.
Yeah, I would agree. You wanna love what you're doing all day long. So um, that's a key point. Okay, well I think that's it. Do you have any closing comments, Andrew?
No, I'll just encourage people to, if they haven't done so already, to go to my website and sign up for my free email newsletter that gives you free trading psychology tips every 2 weeks. It's kind of a no-brainer. It's free and it's very practical.
Yep, I just posted the link there too, guys. You'll see it right there on the left on his webpage. So get signed up for that. We'll get the recording up to YouTube this week, and the email, we'll just send out an email with a link to that soon thereafter. So hopefully you've enjoyed this, and Andrew, thank you again for just taking the time to do this. We all certainly appreciate it, and if there's anything that you guys need from either of us, feel free to reach out. Thanks.
Thank you, Trevor.